Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the candle-lit corridors of an empire that once stretched across mountains, rivers, and glittering courts, yet tonight, it's just you and the soft rhythm of history humming at the edge of your mind. You're standing, in your imagination, beside a cradle draped in gold thread, watching a tiny future queen sleep while ministers whisper outside about wars, succession, and the uncomfortable fact that Europe is basically a group chat always one misunderstanding away from chaos. The air tastes like cold stone and wax, and you can almost hear the rustle of silk beyond the door as servants hurry to make everything look perfectly fine, even though nothing is fine. And honestly, if you were actually born into the Habsburg court, with all those expectations, responsibilities, and uncomfortable outfits, yeah, you probably wouldn't survive a week, don't worry. Neither would I. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're still standing beside that cradle, and the child inside is Maria Theresa, though right now she's just a warm, sleepy bundle unaware that she'll one day hold together an empire that constantly feels like it's duct-taped at the edges. You lean a little closer, hearing her soft breaths, and outside the window the city of Vienna exhales with her, as if sharing the same fragile rhythm. It's a strange beginning, because everyone knows she's important. She's the daughter of Emperor Charles VI, but no one's certain if she can ever rule. The laws are fuzzy, the traditions stricter than your high school dress code, and the European rulers circling like particularly judgmental sharks have opinions about everything. As you wander through the corridors, you can almost taste the unease. Ministers debate the pragmatic sanction. Charles VI's big, "Please don't steal the empire from my daughter," document, which required more signatures, bribes, favors, and desperate promises than a modern influencer sponsorship deal. And yet, even with all those diplomatic gymnastics, the support still feels thin. It's like trying to build a fortress out of pudding. Admirable effort, questionable results. You glide past a group of tutors fussing over a stack of books. They argue about what a girl destined, maybe, to rule should learn. Some think she needs to know statecraft and languages. Others believe embroidery and charm are more useful. You can practically hear the arguments bouncing off the walls. Let her study diplomacy. No, she must learn to host banquets. Honestly, if they had let her learn sword fighting, the whole course of European history might have shifted just from the sheer intimidation factor. But instead, young Maria Theresa grows up absorbing all the political tension without anyone truly preparing her for the job everyone hopes she'll magically figure out one day. You follow her as she toddles through the gardens, her hand reaching up toward sunlight filtered through old chestnut trees. The court ladies trail behind her, chattering like decorative birds. You try to match the child's steps and feel the soft crunch of gravel under your feet. There's something peaceful in that moment. Just a girl discovering beauty while the world debates her future like she's a rare collectible card. And here's your first little-known fact of the night, despite later being described as a strong, commanding presence, she was a surprisingly quiet, Emotional child who cried easily. The imperial court hated that. Apparently, even toddlers were expected to maintain dignity at all times. Which honestly sounds like the least child-friendly rule ever invented. As you wander farther, you stumble upon a private moment. Maria Theresa sitting on her father's lap, her tiny fingers gripping the embroidered edge of his robe. Charles VI adored her. Truly, you sense it in the way he listens carefully, nods at her half-formed stories, and lets her poke curiously at the rings on his hand. He tried so hard to secure her place, even as Europe raised its eyebrows in synchronized disapproval. And yet, despite all that effort, many advisors whispered doubts behind his back. A woman can't rule this realm. They insisted. The laws forbid it. Tradition forbids it. My ego forbids it. The usual. You trail behind them into a council chamber where the child is placed in a corner. Expected to sit still, you feel the heavy air. Men arguing about borders, alliances, debts, always debts, and Maria Theresa simply watches. Absorbing, memorizing, becoming. It's almost eerie how much she sees without anyone noticing her seeing. And somewhere in those rooms, she begins forming the quiet belief that maybe she can rule. Maybe she can hold things together. Maybe she can do it better than these men who keep shouting like roosters arguing at dawn. A funny thought passes through your mind. If the empire were a modern workplace, Maria Theresa is basically the child quietly sitting through meetings she wasn't invited to, only to eventually become the best qualified CEO the company ever had. Except, with more brocade and fewer PowerPoint slides. The years slip by in soft, muted transitions. You see her practicing dances required at court, her feet gliding uncertainly over polished floors. You see her whispering secrets with her sister, Maria Anna, who becomes her closest friend and confidant. And you see her father's anxiety deepen, lines etched into his face, shoulders stiffening each time a messenger arrives with some new complaint from Prussia or France. The empire always seems one step from disaster. It's practically a hobby. One late evening, as torches flicker along the palace walls, you sense a shift. Charles VI is tired. Very tired. You watch Maria Theresa, now older, watching him. Her eyes track every movement, every wince, every sigh. The court physicians come and go, prescribing things like leeches and herbal mixtures that, frankly, you wouldn't feed a houseplant. Despite their efforts, the emperor's health declines. And here's a strange, lesser-known fact. He believed eating mushrooms had doomed him. Not political stress, not diplomatic failure, mushrooms. The court gossiped about it endlessly. The tension becomes heavier, settling like dusk on your shoulders. You're walking through the palace knowing what's coming, knowing how everything will change when Charles VI takes his last breath. Ministers whisper louder. Enemies sharpen metaphorical knives. Allies reconsider their signatures. And you, always walking just a few steps behind Maria Theresa, feel the world tilt. One night, a hush falls over the palace. Servants move like shadows. Bells toll. And there, in the quiet trembling between moments, the child you met beside that golden cradle becomes the woman destined to inherit a storm. But Europe isn't ready for her. And maybe she isn't ready for Europe either. The historians still argue about whether her early upbringing truly prepared her for the chaos ahead, or whether she was shaped more by instinct than design. But that debate will follow later. For now, you just follow her through the long, echoing corridor, feeling the cold floor beneath your feet as everything she's ever known begins to shift under her. You step through that doorway and follow her into a world where every hallway seems to whisper her name, not out of affection, but out of apprehension. The court has shifted overnight. You feel it in the air, like humidity before a storm. One day she was the emperor's cherished daughter. Now she's the uncertain heir of a realm that looks at her as if she's a beautifully wrapped gift they're not sure they ordered. You walk a few steps behind her, always just close enough to hear her breath. Steady but tight, like she already senses the invisible weight settling onto her shoulders. The palace feels different now. Colder. Or maybe it's just that the people inside it have begun transforming into carefully edited versions of themselves. They bow a little deeper, smile a little harder, and speak to her as though every word might be carved into marble by morning. Even the servants behave strangely, trying not to make eye contact as they scurry past. You watch her navigate it all with a growing awareness. She's still young, barely more than a girl, but she moves through the corridors as though trying to memorize the choreography of a dance she wasn't taught. You linger near a doorway where her tutors gather, half whispering and half panicking about what they should adjust in her education now that she is, well, this. One of them insists she must now master statecraft, immediately, as if you can absorb foreign policy the same way you learn a new phone app. Another claims she should focus on languages. Apparently rulers need to charm in multiple dialects. And another, the most anxious of the bunch, keeps muttering about how she was never taught enough mathematics to understand the empire's finances. Honestly, most of today's politicians also don't understand their country's finances. So she's in good company. You follow her into a long hall where portraits of ancestors stare down with that judgmental, "Don't mess this up" expression old paintings specialize in. She pauses before one. Leopold I with his famously extravagant mustache, swirling like two confused squirrels. You almost feel her silently asking him for guidance. Even though he's been dead for decades, the mustache offers no advice. As she continues walking, you're caught in the swirl of court gossip. Ministers mutter about which advisors she should trust. Some quietly hope she'll listen to them. Others hope she'll fail so they can swoop in and tidy up the empire into something more convenient for themselves. One fact not many people know: several of the empire's highest-ranking officials genuinely believed she would hand over most decision-making to them simply because she was young and inexperienced. Spoiler, she does not. You watch her slip into a study. Closing the door softly behind her, she sits at her father's old desk, running her fingers lightly over the ink stains he left behind. You can almost hear her heart beating, a steady, questioning rhythm. The room still smells faintly of him, old parchment, candle smoke, and that particular imperial aroma of stress that no perfume could mask. You take a seat in your imagination across from her, and she looks at the stack of documents piled like miniature mountains awaiting a climber who never trained. Slowly, she begins leafing through them. Treaties, debts, alliances, threats. Basically the 18th century version of "Welcome to your inbox." You have 742 unread messages. You feel her pulse quicken as she realizes just how many signatures, promises, and obligations are tied to her father's name, and now hers. Every page she flips feels like another whisper of pressure pressing against her spine. A soft knock breaks the silence. Her governess enters, carrying a tray of food she probably won't eat. The woman fusses over her, adjusting her collar, reminding her to breathe, to sleep, to stay strong. You sense genuine care, but also a trembling anxiety. The governess knows the court far too well. She knows how swiftly affection can turn into expectation. How quickly expectation becomes scrutiny. Later, you follow Maria Theresa into a rehearsal room where she practices the formal greetings required of a sovereign. Her movements feel stiff, uncertain. She tries again, shoulders back, chin lifted, voice steady. You watch her repeat it over and over, her determination growing with each attempt. There's something almost ASMR-like in the soft rustle of fabric as she bows. The tap of her heels on polished floors. The quiet exhale she releases at the end of each rehearsal. If perfection had a sound, it would be this relentless repetition. She takes a break by a window. Looking out over Vienna, smoke drifts from chimneys, the city pulsing with winter breath. People move like tiny dots in the streets, unaware that their future is being shaped in a room barely larger than a school classroom. You lean beside her, sensing the mix of fear and resolve rising in her like dawn light. She knows the empire is fragile. She knows Europe is waiting to test her. She knows her father believed in her, even when others didn't. And despite everything, she's starting to believe in herself too. But the court keeps pushing. Advisors swarm around her, some helpful, some clingy, some who talk like they're auditioning for the role of most important person in the room. One man insists she must sign a dozen edicts before dinner. Another argues she should make public appearances. A third claims she must read a lengthy document about grain distribution, which frankly, would put anyone to sleep. Here's a lesser-known detail that might surprise you. Early in her reign, ministers frequently argued that her voice was too soft for politics. Too soft, as if volume has anything to do with ruling. If that were true, every loud person on the internet would be running a country, which, thankfully, they are not. Still, through all this noise, Maria Theresa keeps absorbing, watching, learning. You follow her into a council meeting where she sits silently at first, listening to arguments bouncing around the table. The tension is thick enough to slice with a butter knife. But then she speaks, just a few words at first. Calm and clear. The room freezes, not because she's wrong, but because she's right, and no one expected her to be right so quickly. Historians still debate whether her early displays of confidence were genuine or a clever mask hiding her uncertainty. Some think she was naturally commanding. Others argue she learned to perform authority like a role in a long-running theater production. Either way, she manages to steady the room, something even her father occasionally struggled to do. By the end of the day, she returns to her chambers exhausted. You feel it in the slow drag of her footsteps. She collapses onto a chair, rubbing her temples, the weight of empire pressing down. You stand quietly behind her, sensing everything she cannot yet put into words: fear, determination, grief, hope. You almost want to whisper to her that it's going to be okay, that she'll transform herself into one of Europe's most formidable rulers, that she'll survive storms even the bravest kings couldn't weather. But she still has far to go. You step into the next corridor with her, and immediately the air feels heavier, like the palace itself has begun holding its breath. The news of her accession has spread beyond Vienna now, carried by riders galloping through forests, by diplomats scribbling frantic letters, by enemies who have been waiting patiently for this exact moment. You can almost taste the tension, metallic and sharp, as though the walls themselves are bracing for the impact of Europe's collective side-eye. Maria Theresa walks ahead of you, her footsteps measured, her breath calm in a way that feels both practiced and fragile. She's not naive. She knows the empire she just inherited is less a shining jewel and more a giant puzzle missing several important pieces: money, allies, and perhaps most urgently, respect. And yet, she carries herself as though she still believes the pieces can be found, dusted off, and snapped back into place. You follow her into the grand audience chamber where her first formal meeting as ruler is about to begin. Advisors line the room like columns, trying their best to look supportive but failing spectacularly. Their expressions hover somewhere between concern, curiosity, and the subtle panic of people who suspect they might soon need to update their resumes. They rise when she enters, their movements a touch too synchronized, too rehearsed, as if hoping that coordinated politeness might somehow stabilize the empire. She ascends the small platform where her father once stood, and for a moment, she hesitates. Only you notice it, a flicker in her breath, a brief tremor in her hand. Then it's gone, like she pressed an internal switch that replaced instinct with resolve. She speaks, thanking the council for their service, acknowledging the challenges ahead, promising dedication to her father's vision. Her voice is steady, soft but firm, carrying that tone people use when they're done letting others define the narrative. You catch a few raised eyebrows. Soft voice or not, she's already setting the room's rhythm. When she finishes, the ministers begin their reports. And wow, if you ever wanted to hear a list of problems long enough to be its own audiobook, this is the moment. Financial collapse? Check. Weak military? Check. Nervous allies? Triple check. One advisor drones on about the empire's debts in a tone that could flatten even the most caffeinated listener. Another insists that the treasury is so empty, it echoes when you open it. You watch Maria Theresa's expression tighten just slightly, as if she's resisting the urge to ask whether they have any good news whatsoever. To be fair, they do, sort of. A mild harvest from rural Bohemia, a minor diplomatic courtesy from Spain, a shipment of horses successfully delivered. Nothing earth-shattering, but hey, progress is progress. You see her file each bit of information away with astonishing focus, piecing together a picture from fragments everyone else seems to think are irrelevant. But the real shock lands when a messenger rushes in, pale as if he's seen a ghost, not the spooky kind, but the "your neighbor just declared war on you" kind. He bows deeply and announces that Frederick of Prussia has mobilized his forces toward Silesia. A cold ripple moves across the room. You feel it wrap itself around your shoulders, tightening like an uninvited scarf. Maria Theresa's face remains composed, but you can sense the sudden storm inside her. There's fear, yes, but also something sharper, something like defiance. She asks for details, troop numbers, timing, diplomatic channels. Her voice remains steady. Meanwhile, several advisors look like they're about to faint, clutching their papers as though the documents themselves might shield them from Prussian cannons. And here's a lesser-known detail for you. Some ministers, in that moment, quietly suggested that perhaps the empire should simply negotiate generously with Prussia, which is diplomatic code for, let's give him whatever he wants so he leaves us alone. They didn't say it directly to her that day. Cowards rarely show their full feathers immediately. But the suggestion buzzed through the palace like a mosquito that refuses to die. Maria Theresa listens but doesn't yield. She asks the council to prepare a formal response and then dismisses them with a grace that borders on unnerving. You follow her to a private room where she finally lets herself exhale one long, slow breath that feels like a dam releasing just a fraction of the pressure threatening to burst. She sits by the window, resting her forehead against the cool glass. Winter winds curl around the palace, rattling shutters like impatient fingers tapping on a desk. You sit beside her, imagining the quiet weight of her thoughts. She's newly crowned, newly responsible, newly targeted, and with every passing hour, the world seems increasingly eager to test the limits of her strength. She reaches for a letter on her desk, a message from her mother, Eleanor, filled with both comfort and blunt advice. You skim along as she reads it, catching phrases like, "Trust those who prove themselves," and "Your father believed you were stronger than you know." Maria Theresa lingers on that last sentence, her eyes softening, her heartbeat slowing. It's strange, watching her absorb reassurance from someone who's no longer physically present. History often forgets how lonely power can feel. She rises again, calmer now, and begins pacing. Each step is quieter, more deliberate. You sense something shifting deep inside her, a steady click of resolve forming its base. And just when you think the night is done, she calls for a meeting with a small circle of trusted advisors. Not the loud ones, not the ambitious ones, the observant ones, the loyal ones. When they gather, she speaks plainly. The empire will not surrender Silesia without a fight. You see surprise flash across their faces. She's young, inexperienced, still grieving, and yet here she is, speaking with the clarity of someone who has already decided she will not be cornered. One advisor carefully asks whether she understands the scale of the danger. Her answer is simple: "I must." A strange quiet settles over the room. It's not fear or doubt. It's respect, tentative at first, but growing. The historians still argue whether this early moment of resolve was instinctive or strategic. Whether she was naturally stubborn or simply determined not to be dismissed before she'd even begun. But you can feel the truth just by standing here with her. She knows the storm is coming. And she refuses to shrink from it. Later, returning to her chambers, she pauses before her father's portrait. You watch her place her hand over her heart, not dramatically. Just a soft gesture meant for herself rather than anyone else. She whispers something too quiet for you to hear. But you can sense the sentiment: promise, loyalty, perhaps even a plea for strength. Outside, the palace torches flicker in a wind that carries the faint metallic taste of coming conflict. The empire is shifting, rulers are watching, armies are moving, and Maria Theresa, still barely settled into her new role, is already preparing to defend everything her family built. Ahead of you, the next corridor stretches dim and long. You step with her into a world that has stopped pretending to be calm. Overnight, the whispers have sharpened into open warnings. Every corridor hums with a single anxious refrain. Europe is pushing back. And not politely. The way aristocrats usually pretend to disagree, no. This is the kind of pushback that arrives on horseback wearing armor and carrying paperwork that basically says, "We never really meant those treaties anyway." Maria Theresa moves through the palace like someone who has just been handed a puzzle she must solve before it burns the table it's sitting on. You follow her closely, hearing the rustle of her gown brushing stone floors and the quiet rhythm of her breathing. She's afraid, of course she is. But fear isn't slowing her, it's sharpening her. You can almost feel her mind assembling pieces faster than her advisors can speak. Meeting after meeting, note after note, you step into the council chamber again, where tensions have reached a level that could reasonably qualify as palpable. A minister unfolds a map so dramatically you'd think he was presenting a magic trick, revealing borderlines that are no longer borders, alliances that aren't alliances, and territories that have suddenly become negotiable. Another minister talks about troop movements, waving his arms so wildly you're surprised he doesn't knock over a candelabrum. And then comes the newest message from Prussia. Frederick has crossed into Silesia. Silesia, rich, strategic, prized, a jewel in the Habsburg crown. And he's just strolling in like he owns the place. You see Maria Theresa's jaw tighten. Just a fraction. That's her version of flipping a table. The room erupts. Some advisors panic. Some argue. One man insists the empire should temporarily reconsider its claim over the territory. A fancy way of saying, give it up and hope he stops. Another argues that Frederick promised to support the pragmatic sanction and therefore wouldn't dare betray it. Honestly, if naivety were a sport, that man would win gold. Maria Theresa listens, silent and still. When she finally speaks, her voice cuts through the noise like cool water sliding across hot metal. She says the kingdom will defend its rights, its land, and its honor. She says it with confidence. But you can feel the tremor beneath, a razor-thin line between courage and terror. And here's a strange detail. Despite all the bravado coming from her advisors, not a single one of them had a solid plan. Not one. In the early days of the crisis, the empire was like a theater troupe that had lost its lead actor, forgotten the script, and realized halfway through the show that the stage was on fire. Yet somehow, everyone expected her, young, inexperienced, grieving, to improvise flawlessly. You follow her into a small, private office where she finally allows herself a moment to breathe. The room is quiet except for the crackle of a fireplace. She stands near it, palms pressed together, staring into the flames. The shadows flicker across her face, softening her expression into something vulnerable and painfully human. You stand beside her, listening to the fire and to the faint conversations echoing from the hallway. Somewhere, someone is arguing that the army is too weak. Someone else is suggesting a diplomatic mission. Another voice insists the treasury is empty, as if she didn't already know that painfully well. She turns to her secretary and orders letters prepared, letters to allies, to generals, to ministers who need to be reminded that just because the world is shaking doesn't mean the throne is. When she dictates, her voice stays calm, not loud, not commanding in the traditional sense, but steady, focused, determined, like someone who understands that strength isn't always volume, it's conviction. Then a messenger from France arrives. And this is where things get even messier. France had previously agreed to respect the pragmatic sanction, but now their tone is shifting. More vague, more cautious, more, well, technically, you know that tone. It's the same one friends use when they're about to cancel plans they promised months ago. Maria Theresa listens to the French envoy with the kind of strained politeness that deserves an award. She thanks him, she keeps her composure, but you can sense her disappointment. France could be an ally, but it's choosing to sit on the fence. And in 18th century Europe, fence-sitting usually means sharpening knives on both sides just in case. You step outside with her into a long gallery. Sunlight filtering through tall windows. She pauses, placing a hand on the cool glass. Looking out at Vienna, you see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. But beneath it all, there's something growing. Resolve, a steady flame. She knows Europe doubts her. She knows men who smiled politely at her father now question her right to rule. She knows Frederick is counting on her hesitation. She knows the world expects her to crumble. And she will not. She walks with that certainty into another meeting where the generals present options. Most of them are bad. One proposes a hasty defensive position. Another believes the troops could march but lacks confidence in their training. A third suggests hiring mercenaries, expensive ones. You can practically feel her teeth grinding behind her diplomatic composure. But here's a lesser-known fact. One historians love to debate. Some early military reports indicate that Maria Theresa showed more strategic instinct in those first weeks than many of her generals. The debate continues because some argue the documents were embellished. Others insist she truly had a natural grasp of military pacing and resource management. Standing beside her now, you can tell she's absorbing every detail with almost unsettling clarity. She ends the meeting by stating the empire will resist. She doesn't shout. She doesn't pound the table. She simply says it, and something in her tone makes even the skeptical generals straighten their backs. Night falls. You follow her to her private chapel, where she kneels, not with dramatics. Not with despair, but with a quiet intensity that feels heavier than any crown. She prays for guidance, for strength, for the ability to lead wisely. The candlelight flickers across her face, and you feel something shift inside you too. Sympathy, admiration, maybe even a strange protectiveness toward this young ruler who is trying so hard not to show how overwhelmed she truly is. When she rises, she stands taller, not because the crisis is easier, it isn't, but because she has made a choice. She will not negotiate away her inheritance. She will not bow to Frederick. She will face the storm, even if she must do it with trembling hands. Historians still argue whether this fierce early resolve was idealism or pragmatism. Whether she understood the consequences or simply refused to lose before the fight began. But from where you're standing, watching her step into the darkened hallway, You know this much. She's not just reacting to Europe. She's beginning to push back. You step into the next room with her. And immediately the atmosphere changes. It's no longer the frantic rustle of advisors scrambling to interpret Europe's intentions. Now, it's the internal heartbeat of an empire trying to remember its own strength. You feel it in the air, a low thrum, like the slow, steady build of a drum roll. Outside, diplomats are sending letters, kings are drafting threats, and Frederick is polishing his ambitions like a man who's already chosen his wallpaper for the house he hasn't technically stolen yet. But here, in this moment, the focus shifts inward. How do you rally a realm that is fracturing at its edges? Maria Theresa walks ahead of you through a wide corridor lined with statues of past rulers. Most of them stare ahead with stoic faces carved from marble. But somehow they all look like they're whispering, "Good luck, kid." It's both encouraging and deeply unhelpful. She glances up at them, maybe hoping for inspiration, maybe imagining them rolling their stone eyes at her council's latest bout of panic. You follow her into a briefing room where representatives from various territories have gathered. They stand clustered like mismatched puzzle pieces: Hungarians, Bohemians, Austrians, Lombards, each with their own political agendas, priorities, and levels of enthusiasm for the idea of unity. Some offer reassuring nods. Others offer looks that are basically diplomatic ways of saying, "Prove you can handle this." And a few stare with open skepticism, certain she's too young, too inexperienced, too everything they don't trust. She takes her place at the head of the table. The chatter subsides. You hear papers rustle, boots scrape, someone coughs into a sleeve. The tension is thick enough that if someone swung a sword through it, sparks would fly. Maria Theresa begins speaking, not loudly, not theatrically. Her voice is calm, almost soft, but the room leans in. She lays out the situation with clarity sharper than any blade. Prussia has invaded Silesia. Allies are stalling. The empire is vulnerable. And yet, she refuses to consider surrender. You watch the representatives exchange glances, some impressed, some startled, some unsure whether this confidence comes from courage or denial. Then she does something subtle but brilliant. She appeals not to politics, not to strategy, but to loyalty, personal loyalty. She invokes her father, the late emperor, reminding them of their oaths to him. She reminds them of the pragmatic sanction, of the signatures that promised to uphold her inheritance. And then she shifts the tone, making it clear that their support is not merely a formality, it is a lifeline. You watch them soften, almost reluctantly. This is her power, not threats, not intimidation, but sincerity. Historians still argue whether her emotional intelligence was instinctive or carefully cultivated in court life. Some claim she had an innate ability to sway people. Others believe her upbringing in the constant swirl of politics honed her intuition. Either way, you can see the effect plainly. She makes them feel the stakes. But the unity she seeks isn't easy. Some representatives insist they have their own regional concerns. Others emphasize they cannot send troops because harvests were poor or coffers are thin. One particularly dramatic nobleman laments that his territory is exhausted by years of neglect, which is both overly theatrical and, uncomfortably, not entirely untrue. Maria Theresa listens to each objection carefully. You watch the way she nods, how she jots down small notes, the way her eyes sharpen with each new piece of information. She's not just hearing complaints, she's mapping the landscape of loyalty. Identifying who can be counted on, who needs reassurance, and who requires a firm nudge. When the meeting ends, she walks out into the hallway with a mixture of hope and worry pulsing beneath her steady exterior. You follow her through the palace gardens, where the winter air carries the scent of frost and distant wood smoke. She moves slowly here, letting the silence settle, letting herself feel the weight of what she must do next. Because speeches won't be enough. Not now. That's when she decides to do something rare for rulers of her time. She will appeal directly to her subjects. Traveling through the empire herself. No delegation, no surrogates. Just her, young, untested, and determined. Her entourage tries to talk her out of it. They argue about the dangers, the optics, the impropriety. One counselor claims the journey will make her look desperate. Another insists she must remain in Vienna to project stability. A third warns that if she leaves, enemies might see it as a sign of weakness. She listens politely, then ignores them. Because she knows something they don't. The empire isn't going to rally because of strategies drafted in a gilded room. It will rally because of belief. Real, human belief. And people believe in someone they can see. Someone who stands before them with sincerity rather than speeches delivered through intermediaries. And here's a lesser-known truth historians often gloss over. Maria Theresa was not only charismatic, she was magnetic. Not in a flamboyant, spotlight-demanding way, but in a grounded, earnest way that made people want to stand behind her. Even those initially skeptical found themselves swayed by her presence. You see the first hints of this as she prepares for the journey. She selects modest carriages, not the ostentatious ones dripping with gold but sturdy. Practical ones that can handle long roads. She chooses a small retinue of trusted attendants. You watch her pack documents, maps, letters, even a small keepsake of her father's, a simple pendant she tucks inside her gown. You feel the emotion in that tiny gesture. The way she carries him with her not as a symbol but as a reminder of the promise she made in her heart. As she steps outside the palace gates, the wind picks up, tugging at her cloak. You feel the bite of cold on your own skin. The way the early morning air stings like it's trying to wake the entire empire from its uncertainty. She pauses just a moment, scanning the horizon. Ahead lie cities where she must persuade, regions where she must reassure, and leaders she must convince that staying united is not a request, it's survival. Before she climbs into the carriage, a stable boy approaches her timidly. He bows, cheeks flushed with cold, and murmurs, "God bless your reign, your majesty." It's simple. But it hits her deeply. You see her smile, soft, grateful, touched, and in that moment, you realize something powerful. She isn't just rallying the empire. She is connecting with it. The historians still argue about whether this first journey was motivated by desperation or genius. But as you step into the carriage beside her, feeling the wheels lurch forward, you know the truth from the inside. She is becoming the heart of her realm, one beat, 1 mile, one promise at a time. The road stretches out in front of you. A long ribbon of frost-bitten earth lined with bared trees that reach upward like skeletal fingers. The carriage sways gently, its wheels crunching over winter stones. And through a small window you watch the horizon slowly brighten with the pale wash of morning light. Maria Theresa sits across from you, wrapped in a heavy cloak, her breath warming the cold air in faint white wisps. She looks tired, but not defeated. There's a steadiness in her posture, the kind that comes from someone who has already decided she won't let anyone else define her story. The journey takes you through small villages first, places where chimneys smoke and children chase geese across muddy courtyards. People gather when the carriage arrives, curious, skeptical, hopeful, all at once. And when Maria Theresa steps out, something shifts. You can feel it in the way farmers straighten their backs, in the way grandmothers clutch their shawls, in the way even the smallest children stand still just to catch a glimpse. They've heard of the crisis, the invasion, the uncertainty, but now they see the person at the center of it all. Not a rumor, not a painting, not a proclamation, her. You watch her speak to them, softly, respectfully, with a sincerity that settles gently over the crowd. She doesn't make grand declarations. She doesn't bark commands. Instead, she listens. She asks about harvests, homes, families. She kneels beside an elderly woman who can barely stand, taking her hand and thanking her for coming. You notice how the villagers look at one another afterward, their skepticism dissolving into something warmer, steadier, more loyal. And this is where the truth becomes clear. Charisma for Maria Theresa isn't about sparkle or drama. It's about presence. She has the rare ability to make people feel seen. And that, in a world shaped by crowns and cannons, is perhaps the most potent power of all. As the journey progresses, the roads grow wider, the towns larger, delegations greet her with formal bows, and local leaders present carefully crafted speeches. But beneath all the formality, you sense something unfiltered stirring through the empire, a rising willingness to fight alongside her. Not because they're commanded, but because they believe she will fight for them. Then, in the city of Pressburg, fate nudges her toward the next chapter of her life, not with politics or war, but with a person. Francis Stephen of Lorraine arrives to meet her, and the moment he steps into the grand hall, you feel the energy shift as though someone opened a window and let in warm light. He moves with a gentle confidence, not the stiff kind you see in most aristocrats. His smile isn't polished, it's genuine. And when his eyes meet hers, something softens in her, just slightly, but enough for you to notice. You watch them greet each other with polite formality. But beneath the surface, there's a glimmer of something human, something warm, something neither politics nor war can destroy. Here's a little-known truth. Maria Theresa had met Francis years earlier, before her father officially supported the match. Back then, she had admired him from afar, finding his kindness refreshing in a court full of ambition. Now, with the empire trembling around her, he steps into her world like a quiet anchor. The court quickly circles them with speculation. Some ministers complain that a ruler at war shouldn't be distracted by marriage. Others argue that a union with a man from Lorraine, recently stripped of his own duchy, might weaken perceptions of imperial strength. Yet, amidst the swirl of opinions, Maria Theresa remains unshaken. She chooses him, not because of strategy, not because of alliances, though alliances certainly don't hurt, but because she trusts him. And trust is a rare currency in an empire where loyalty is often conditional. You watch them walk in the palace gardens, snow crunching beneath their boots. He speaks gently, hands clasped behind his back, offering comfort without overstepping. She listens, allowing herself to breathe more freely than she has in weeks. When he tells her he believes she will lead well, you see the tension in her shoulders melt just enough to reveal how much she needed someone, just one person, who wasn't doubting her. Their marriage is arranged quickly, almost too quickly for the slower rhythms of royal tradition. But the empire needs stability, and she needs a partner she can trust to stand behind her when armies and diplomats begin circling like wolves. The wedding day arrives, wrapped in candlelight and whispered prayers. You stand near the back of the chapel, watching them exchange vows. There's a weight to the ceremony. Not heavy like dread, but heavy like responsibility. Two lives braiding together, not in a fairy tale swirl, but in a partnership forged for survival. After the ceremony, foreign ambassadors murmur their observations. Some think the match is weak. Others think it's emotional rather than strategic. A few fear Lorraine's closeness will give Francis more influence than is wise. But none of them understand what you are beginning to see clearly. Francis is not here to overshadow her. He's here to ground her. And here's a lesser-known fact: Francis Stephen, despite being mild-mannered and gentle, was deeply ambitious for her, not in a controlling way, but in a supportive one. He wanted her to succeed, not because it benefited him, but because he believed in her capacity even before many in her council did. Over the next weeks, you watch their rhythms intertwine: late-night conversations, shared glances across council tables, quiet walks where she tells him her fears and he answers with patience instead of panic. He isn't a warrior, he isn't a political mastermind, but he is steady, and she needs steady more than anything. The historians still debate the significance of their bond. Some say it was a marriage of necessity. Others argue it was one of rare royal affection. But as you step out of the carriage with her during their next journey and see him at her side, offering his arm gently, you know what it really is. A marriage of strategy. That became a marriage of strength. Outside, the empire still trembles. Frederick advances. Allies hesitate. Plans unfold like threads pulled too tightly. But she is no longer standing alone. The first thing you feel is the wind, sharp, metallic, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of distant fires and even more distant fear. War hasn't fully arrived yet. Not in the cannon's thundering sense. But it's creeping in like a cold front, settling over every conversation, every letter, every hurried footstep in the palace corridors. You follow Maria Theresa closely now. Her pace faster, her shoulders squared in a way that tells you she's done waiting for Europe to decide whether she deserves her crown. She strides into the council chamber with Francis beside her. And today the atmosphere is different. The advisors look tired, their eyes hollow, their powdered wigs slightly crooked, as though even their fashion sense has surrendered. Several maps are already rolled out on the long table, inked with thick red lines that spread across Silesia like a rash. Every time you look at them, they seem worse. More villages taken, more roads blocked, more letters reporting urgent developments, which is diplomatic shorthand for Frederick is being a menace again. Maria Theresa takes her seat. and the generals begin their reports. Some try to soften the blow. Others speak bluntly, their words falling like stones on the table. The army is underprepared, training is inconsistent, supplies are low, morale is wavering, and Frederick's forces? Well-trained, well-funded, well-led, basically the opposite of everything the Habsburg army is at this moment. You watch her face carefully. She doesn't flinch, though you sense the quiet jolt beneath the surface. The kind that comes when reality slams into hope with unkind precision. But she doesn't lash out. She doesn't collapse. She simply absorbs everything, her expression smoothing into the kind of calm resolve people mistake for fearlessness. One general, a stout man with a booming voice, insists the empire simply isn't ready for a counteroffensive. Another suggests retreat. A third, whose uniform is too crisp, as if he hasn't been outside a ballroom in years, proposes waiting for diplomatic pressure to work its magic. You almost laugh. If diplomacy were going to help, it would have helped before Frederick marched in like he was going on a brisk winter stroll. Then comes a lesser-known twist, a young officer, barely older than a student fresh out of a military academy, steps forward and makes a suggestion others find rash. He proposes assembling a rapid response force, small, mobile, strategically nimble, something that could test Prussian lines without risking the entire army. It's not a plan that promises victory, but it promises momentum, and momentum is something the empire desperately needs. Maria Theresa listens intently. You see the flicker of interest in her eyes. The older generals scoff, muttering about proper tactics and experience. But she doesn't dismiss the idea. She asks questions, sharp ones, questions that make even the proudest generals straighten up. Because she's revealing exactly how closely she's been studying their reports. Here's a detail historians still debate. Was she genuinely confident in military strategy? Or just blessed with good instincts? Some claim she had a natural, almost intuitive sense of pacing and morale. Others argue her interest in military matters grew purely from necessity. But standing next to her now, watching her dissect battlefield plans like a seasoned commander, you can't help but think she has always been smarter than her council gave her credit for. The meeting ends with a compromise. Troops will be mobilized quickly. With both traditional formations and the young officer's rapid unit, it's not a perfect plan, but it's forward motion. And sometimes forward motion is the only antidote to fear. After the council adjourns, you trail her through the palace, where she stops at an open balcony. The city stretches below, rooftops clustered like patchwork, smoke curling into the pale winter sky. She stands there quietly, gripping the edge of the stone railing, letting the cold air steady her. Francis joins her. He doesn't speak at first. He just stands beside her, shoulder brushing hers lightly. It's a small gesture, but powerful. After a moment, he whispers something meant only for her, not strategy, not advice, but reassurance. Something like, "You're doing everything you can, and they'll follow you." She exhales slowly, as though releasing a breath she's held since the moment she inherited the throne. Later, she visits the barracks, and this is where the transformation becomes unmistakable. The soldiers, many young and anxious, scramble into lines the moment she arrives. They're nervous. She can sense it, so can you. These men are about to face one of Europe's most formidable armies. And they know it. Instead of delivering a grand speech, she walks among them, she makes eye contact, she asks names, she thanks them for their service. She places a steady hand on the shoulder of a soldier who looks barely old enough to shave. She kneels to speak to another whose arm is wrapped in bandages. The captains exchange surprised glances. They had expected a distant queen. Not a presence that feels human. This isn't theatrics. This is connection. The same magic she used in villages is now working on the army itself. You watch as shoulders straighten, as spirits lift, as doubt softens into determination. A soldier, emboldened, asks whether she's truly confident they can win. For a flicker of a moment, you expect her to lie, to say something like, "Victory is guaranteed," but she doesn't. She says, "We will endure, and we will do it together." You feel it, a quiet wave moving through the ranks, strength drawn not from bravado, but from solidarity. As she leaves the barracks, you hear two officers whisper that she has more courage than half the generals combined. One even admits he underestimated her. Dramatically, you'd pat him on the back for personal growth if you could. Night falls. Rain begins to tap against the palace windows. Soft and rhythmic, Maria Theresa sits at her desk. Candlelight dancing over maps and letters. She writes instructions, encouragements, strategies. Her handwriting is steady even as the candle flickers. Historians still argue whether her early leadership in the war was truly effective or simply symbolic. Some claim it boosted morale. Others believe it bought time. But experiencing it here, beside her, you understand something academic debates rarely capture. Her presence held the empire together when logic said it should have collapsed. She closes her eyes for a brief moment. A prayer? A wish? A gathering of strength? When she opens them again, that steadiness returns. Because tomorrow, the war begins in full. You hear the footsteps before you see her, soft, light, almost musical in their rhythm. A child's footsteps. When Maria Theresa turns toward the doorway, her expression shifts into a tenderness so immediate, so instinctive, you feel it radiate like warmth from a nearby fire. A small girl rushes in, curls bouncing, cheeks flushed with the pure energy of childhood. She isn't poised like Maria Anna or effortlessly charming like Christine. She's luminous, untamed, curious, slightly chaotic in the way only a brilliant, mischievous young child can be. She is Maria Antonia, the girl who will one day be known to the world as Marie Antoinette. But right now, she is just a bright, playful spark flickering through the palace corridors, 8 years old, brimming with enthusiasm, and utterly unaware of the weight history will place upon her shoulders. Maria Theresa watches her with a mixture of amusement and apprehension. This child is different, not because she is more beautiful or clever, though she has hints of both, but because she moves through the world like someone who trusts it completely. And trust, in royal life, is both precious and dangerous. You follow them into a sunlit practice room where a dance instructor is waiting. His posture rigid, his expression resigned. He knows today's lesson may be eventful. Maria Antonia attempts a curtsy. Attempts is the correct word. It begins gracefully and ends in a small, dramatic wobble that sends her nearly tumbling into her mother's arms. She giggles, delighted by her own near disaster. Maria Theresa sighs, lovingly, but with a hint of exasperation. She must learn discipline, the queen whispers under her breath, though her smile betrays her amusement. Because here's a lesser-known truth, of all the children, Maria Antonia was the least academically inclined. She preferred dancing to studying, singing to reading, laughter to lessons, and while her mother adored her, she worried, deeply. The world Maria Antonia would enter, the French court, was not a place that forgave innocence. You see Maria Theresa kneel before her daughter, smoothing the child's hair back with gentle fingers. Again, she says softly, not harsh, not frustrated, just firm enough. And the little girl tries again. This time she manages the curtsy with something like real grace. She beams up at her mother as if she's just accomplished a heroic feat. You feel Maria Theresa's heart swell and ache at the same time. Later, in the study, the Queen meets with several advisors who have come bearing diplomatic updates. They speak of shifting alliances, of France's ambitions, of the possibility, whispered, not stated plainly, that a daughter might soon be needed to seal a reconciliation between two old rivals. And though they do not name her, Maria Antonia's shadow flickers along the edges of that conversation. Maria Theresa listens in silence. She knows France is the glittering jewel of alliances, the pinnacle, the crown jewel of diplomacy. But she also knows the French court is treacherous, a labyrinth of etiquette, rivalry, gossip, and fragile pride. A place where a misstep can become a scandal, and a scandal can become a legend. She glances toward the next room, where Maria Antonia's laughter rings like bells. And her heart twists. You walk with her afterward into the children's schoolroom. She observes each child quietly, assessing their progress. Maria Antonia sits at a writing desk, her letters uneven, her attention drifting toward the window where snowflakes swirl like tiny dancers. The tutor clears his throat nervously. Your Majesty, the Archduchess is improving. Maria Theresa nods, but she sees the truth. She always sees the truth. When the lesson ends, she calls Maria Antonia to her side. You must try harder, she says gently. I am trying, the girl answers earnestly. But that's the thing, trying is not enough for the future that awaits her. Maria Theresa lifts her daughter's chin, meeting her eyes. One day, you may go somewhere far from home, she says softly, somewhere where the world watches every step. Maria Antonia tilts her head, curious, not understanding. Her mother doesn't elaborate. How could she? How do you explain destiny to a child who still believes the world is simple? The Queen lets her go, watching her skip away with a pang that tugs visibly at her composure. Later, in her private chambers, Maria Theresa unrolls a report on the French Dauphin, awkward, shy, gentle, raised under rigid court rules. She imagines her daughter beside him, this lively, spontaneous child trying to navigate Versailles. Her breath catches. She presses her hands to her forehead, whispering a prayer that sounds both protective and resigned. Historians argue endlessly whether sending Maria Antonia to France was wise or disastrous. Whether it was foresight or miscalculation. Whether it saved Europe or cost a queen her peace. But standing here with her, you see the truth with painful clarity. Maria Theresa wasn't thinking of politics alone. She was thinking of her daughter's future, of what she might endure, of what she might become, of what she might suffer. And she was terrified of choosing wrong. Evening settles softly over the palace. Candles flare. Servants move quietly through the corridors. Maria Antonia appears again, pajamas embroidered with tiny stitched flowers, climbing into her mother's lap like she has always belonged there. And for a moment, just a moment, Maria Theresa lets the world fall away. She wraps her arms around her daughter and closes her eyes, breathing in the warmth, the innocence, the fleeting peace of now. Because she knows one day, this child will leave her. One day, this bright light will walk into the storm of Versailles. One day, history will carve her name into its pages with both beauty and tragedy. But not tonight. Tonight, Maria Antonia falls asleep in her mother's arms, unaware of her destiny. And the queen holds her just a little tighter. The palace is quiet, but it's the wrong kind of quiet, the heavy, breath-holding silence that settles before a storm. You walk beside Maria Theresa through a dim corridor lit only by flickering sconces. And the air feels charged, as though the empire itself senses that something vast, something brutal, something reshaping is about to begin. Because this is where her world tilts again. Where old alliances collapse, new ones form, and Europe plunges into a conflict so sprawling and merciless that later generations will call it the First Global War. The 7 Years' War. You feel her shoulders tighten as she enters the council chamber. Maps cover the table, fresh ones, outdated ones. Ones drawn hastily by scouts reporting from frozen forests and rain-soaked ravines. The generals look exhausted, their uniforms wrinkled, their faces pale from too many sleepless nights. The ministers look even worse, because unlike soldiers, they don't know how to wear fear with dignity. Maria Theresa listens as the reports begin. Prussia is mobilizing again. Frederick is moving faster than anyone anticipated. France, unexpectedly, shows signs of cooperation. Russia is stirring, a giant waking from uneasy sleep. The Queen's heart kicks hard. Once, then steadies into that familiar rhythm of determination that's carried her through every crisis so far. One minister clears his throat, holding a trembling sheet of parchment. Your Majesty, the invasion of Saxony has begun. The words hang in the room like smoke. Saxony, Austria's neighbor, Austria's necessary buffer, Austria's reluctant partner, is being sucked into Frederick's orbit. Its princes scrambling, its citizens terrified. This isn't just a border skirmish or a regional conflict. This is the first spark of a bonfire that will spread across continents. Maria Theresa closes her eyes for a single heartbeat. She knew the war would come. But knowing is not the same as watching it ignite. You follow her as she rises, her gown whispering across the stone floor. She doesn't speak yet. She's thinking, calculating, processing every move Frederick might make. Her silence unnerves the council more than shouting ever could. Finally, she says, "Prepare the envoys." And with those 4 words, the war shifts. Hours later, you stand beside her in the diplomatic hall where ambassadors from France, Russia, Sweden, and Saxony gather. The tension is thick enough to choke on. France, Austria's old enemy, approaches with a cautious bow. Russia's representative, frost clinging to his cloak, speaks in measured tones. Even the usually aloof Swedes look interested. This is the diplomatic revolution historians will marvel at. Austria and France, once mortal rivals, suddenly moving toward alliance. But what they often forget is the sheer emotional difficulty of that shift. For centuries, France had mocked the Habsburgs, undermined them, challenged them, and now, Maria Theresa must shake hands with the court that once despised her. A lesser ruler might bristle. She embraces the necessity. The French ambassador mentions a possible treaty. She listens, nods, does not flinch. She understands that in this game, dignity must sometimes yield to survival. And here's the little-known truth. The real mastermind behind this alliance is her foreign minister. Kaunitz, a brilliantly eccentric man rumored to powder his pet dogs and dance naked in his villa courtyard for inspiration. Strange, yes. Effective? Absolutely. Maria Theresa trusts him, even admires him, though sometimes she has to ignore his fashion choices for the sake of diplomacy. You watch her sign the preliminary agreements, and something inside her seems to harden, crystallize into resolve, because the moment the ink dries, the board is set. Austria, France, Russia, Sweden, against Prussia. One woman's determination has reshaped the continent. But alliances make promises. Wars make demands. The next morning, generals bring fresh reports. Prussian forces advance like a machine, precise, disciplined, terrifying in their unity. Frederick isn't just a king. He's a strategist who moves with unnatural speed, anticipating Austrian reactions before they happen. The losses begin pouring in. A regiment overwhelmed. A garrison forced to retreat. Supplies intercepted. Villages deserted. You feel Maria Theresa absorb each blow with a quiet stoicism that would break most people. She does not cry. She does not explode in anger. But her hands tighten around each letter until her knuckles turn white. One general reports a defeat in vivid detail. His voice somber. When he finishes, he adds gently, "Our men fought bravely." Maria Theresa answers softly, "Then they will be remembered bravely." Her tone is level, steady, but beneath it, you hear the faint tremor of a woman carrying both the living and the dead on her conscience. As the war expands, so does her workload. Meetings stretch from dawn until the candles gutter at midnight. She reads hundreds of dispatches. She organizes relief efforts for refugees. She writes encouragement to generals who fear failing her. She comforts wounded soldiers during hospital visits. And every night, she returns to her children, exhausted, depleted, but determined not to let them feel the terror creeping at the empire's borders. One evening, she steps into the nursery after midnight. Only a single candle glows. Maria Anna is awake, reading quietly. Maria Antonia sleeps curled like a kitten. Joseph dreams fitfully. Maria Theresa stands over her heir, brushing his hair from his forehead. "You must be stronger than I am," she whispers. A confession. A wish. A warning. Historians still debate whether Maria Theresa saw this war as vengeance or justice. Whether she sought to reclaim Silesia out of pride or duty. Whether her alliance with France was brilliance or desperation. But as you watch her turn away from the sleeping children and return to her war table, you understand something the textbooks often flatten. This war is not about glory, not about revenge, not even about territory. It is about not being erased, about proving that a young queen, dismissed, doubted, underestimated, can stand against one of the greatest military minds of her age. She will not let Frederick define her reign. She will not let her father's legacy crumble. She will not raise 16 children in a broken empire. Even if the war drains her to the bone, she will fight. Outside the palace, the wind howls like a warning. Soldiers march toward distant battlefields. Drums thud, horses whinny. Snow gathers along the roads where armies will soon bleed into the mud. Maria Theresa stands at her balcony, watching the torches flicker through the darkness as regiments depart. Her breath clouds the air. Her eyes shine, not with tears, but with the reflection of the fires burning in the valley. She whispers something so soft you almost miss it. God be with them. Not a command. Not a decree. A plea. You can feel the world tilting as you step with her into the next chapter. A quiet room filled with the low murmur of advisors. Maps pinned to walls, and the faint rustle of papers that hold the fate of empires. But this time, there's something else in the air too. A strange new current, a shift in the gravitational pull of Europe itself. Because now comes the great diplomatic pivot, a maneuver so bold, so shocking, so world-rearranging that later historians will call it nothing less than a geopolitical earthquake. This is the moment alliances flip upside down. Friends become strangers. Enemies become allies. And Maria Theresa steps fully into the role not just of queen, but of architect of a new European order. When you enter the council chamber with her, the mood is tense but electric. Kaunitz, the flamboyant, genius foreign minister, stands before a huge wall map surrounded by candles. The flickering light makes him look half mystic, half mad scientist. He clears his throat dramatically. He always does everything dramatically. And announces, "The world must turn, and we must turn with it." The advisors stare at him, baffled, but Maria Theresa's eyes narrow with interest. She knows that tone. Kaunitz has an idea, a big one. And he does. He proposes something wild. Austria must abandon centuries of hostility and ally with France. France, the country that has battled the Habsburgs for generations. France, the court that sneered every time Vienna stumbled. France, the sharp-tongued rival whose ambassadors never missed a chance to undermine her father. And now Kaunitz wants her to embrace them. You feel the room freeze. This isn't just politically risky. It's emotionally unthinkable for half the men in this chamber. One minister sputters, "Your Majesty, France is our hereditary enemy." Kaunitz smiles slyly. Hereditary enemies are a luxury during a war for survival. Maria Theresa says nothing for a long moment. She inhales slowly. She looks at the map where Prussia looms like a dark blot spreading across Central Europe. Then she nods once. Begin the negotiations. A few advisors gasp. Others stare at her like they're seeing her for the first time. Because this isn't just pragmatism. It's strategic genius bound to personal humility. It takes courage, not battlefield courage, but the quieter kind, the courage to let go of old grudges and seek new futures. And here's the truth few people appreciate. She didn't make this decision lightly. She swallowed centuries of pride because she saw the world clearly. Without illusion. That is the mark of a ruler, not a royal. As days fold into weeks, you watch diplomacy transform from whispers to signatures. French envoys arrive with deep bows and rehearsed politeness. Russian diplomats present commitments sealed with imperial wax. Kaunitz flutters around like an eccentric maestro orchestrating a symphony only he can hear. Maria Theresa watches it all with steady composure, guiding the negotiations with a hand both gentle and iron-strong. One night, she reads a letter from Louis XV. His tone is cautious, almost embarrassed. France is unused to approaching Austria with reconciliation. She smiles faintly, amused by the awkward politeness. Then her smile fades as she pictures her daughter Maria Antonia in Versailles someday. Her future tied to this fragile shift. You see the mixture in her eyes. Hope, fear, resolve. Because alliances aren't just treaties. They're futures. They're fates. As the coalition strengthens, preparations for a counteroffensive begin. Russia moves forces west. France commits troops. Sweden signals support. The empire feels less alone than it has in years. But Frederick is watching. And he reacts like a man suddenly surrounded by wolves. His movements grow erratic, sharper, more aggressive. His letters drip with disdain. He calls the new alliance a dance of desperate monarchs, which, honestly, is kind of a poetic insult, though the Queen doesn't dignify it with a response. Military reports arrive quickly now. The ink barely dry before new ones take their place. Russian troops crossing borders. French regiments massing in the Rhineland. Austrian forces reorganizing with new vigor. Hungarian cavalry preparing for a decisive push. But alliances forged in shock still need time to solidify. And Frederick moves fast, sometimes too fast. A dispatch arrives one cold morning. Prussia strikes first. Frederick launches a brutal offensive against a coalition army before Austria and France can fully coordinate. The battle is chaotic, ferocious. The outcome is ambiguous. Some victories, some setbacks. Nothing decisive yet, but enough to remind everyone why he is feared. Maria Theresa reads the report silently. Then she asks calmly, "How many casualties?" The general hesitates. Then tells her. She closes her eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough for you to see the weight sink deeper. Yet when she opens them, her gaze is hard as polished stone. "We continue," she says. No tremor. No hesitation. She is not reckless. She is not naive. She is committed. Later that night, you find her walking alone in the palace gardens. Snowfall drifting around her like a veil. She wraps her cloak tighter. Breath steaming in the cold air. Francis approaches quietly. He always seems to know when she needs him, and stands beside her. "You are changing Europe," he says softly. She looks up at him. Shadows under her eyes. "Europe forces me to," she answers. "Every time I hold the crown, it reshapes itself." He touches her hand. "You're doing what must be done." She sighs, eyes focusing on the snow settling over bare branches. I just pray it will be enough." Historians still debate her motivations. Was she determined to reclaim Silesia or simply determined not to be humiliated by Frederick? Was her alliance with France visionary or desperate? But watching her now, watching her breath mingle with winter air as she searches the darkness for reassurance the world cannot give her. You understand. This wasn't ambition. This wasn't revenge. This was transformation born from necessity. She wasn't just reacting to Europe. She was reshaping it. You feel it the moment you enter the corridor, a strange stillness. Heavy and unnatural, like the palace itself is bracing for something it does not want to hold. The footsteps of servants are quieter. The tapestries seem to swallow sound instead of reflecting it. Even the candle flames flicker lower, as if dimming themselves out of respect. This is the chapter where history stops being political and becomes painfully, devastatingly personal. Because this is where Maria Theresa loses the person who steadied her. In every storm up until now. Francis Stephen. It begins subtly, a messenger rushing through the doors. Head bowed, face pale, you follow him into the Queen's study, where she is reviewing military dispatches by candlelight. She looks up, sensing the urgency before he speaks. "Your Majesty, the Emperor has collapsed." The words fall like stones. She rises immediately. No gasp, no cry, just movement, fast and focused, her gown whispering behind her as she rushes down the corridor. You race beside her, the air thickening with dread at every step. They reach the chamber where Francis lies surrounded by physicians. Their faces solemn. He is breathing, but shallowly. His skin has the sheen of someone who has stepped too close to death. You see Maria Theresa's hand tremble as she kneels beside him. The first tremble you've seen in what feels like years. "Franz," she whispers, just his name. He opens his eyes weakly. Her face softens with a mixture of hope and terror. He tries to smile, but the moment is fragile, too fragile, and you feel it snapping like thin ice. A physician steps forward, hesitant. "Majesty, it was apoplexy." A stroke. The word lands like a blade in her chest. She takes Francis's hand, clutching it against her cheek. Her breath trembling. You can feel her voice cracking even when she forces it steady. "I am here. I am right here." For a few precious moments. He seems to recognize her. His fingers twitch in hers. His lips move, forming a word you can't hear, a private message meant only for her. Perhaps thank you, perhaps goodbye, perhaps her name. Then his breath falters. And stops. The world goes silent. Not the kind of silence filled with reverence. The kind filled with absence. A silence that hollows out the air itself. Maria Theresa presses her forehead to his hand, her shoulders shaking once, only once, before she forces herself upright. As if refusing to crumble even now. But her eyes are shattered glass. They escort her gently from the room, not as Empress, not as Queen, but as a woman who has just lost the love of her life. The hallways blur around her as she walks, slow, dazed, almost ghost-like. You stay close, sensing each breath she takes becomes heavier, harder. Days pass in a haze of formal mourning. Black drapes cover the palace. Bells toll. Ministers move with hushed voices. The empire grieves its emperor, but none as deeply as she does. Her grief is raw, unvarnished. She refuses most meals. She barely speaks. Letters pile on her desk unopened. Even the war seems to pause around her, respectfully or fearfully, unsure how to function when its anchor has vanished. Her children gather around her, some crying openly, some confused, some trying to be strong. She tries to comfort them, but her voice breaks every time she says their father's name. Maria Anna wraps her arms around her tightly. Joseph stands quietly at her side, eyes lowered. Maria Antonia clings to her skirts, whispering, "Mama, don't be sad," with the innocence that only pierces more deeply. One evening, after everyone has left her chamber, she collapses into a chair and sobs silently. Silent because the weight of her position denies her even the freedom of full grief. You feel it tear through her like an invisible storm. She touches the small items Francis left behind. His signet ring. His rosary. The portrait he kept of her. A note he once wrote. Folded so many times it has softened like cloth. Each item a dagger of memory. And then she whispers, through tears that finally spill freely, "I would give all my crowns just to hold your hand again." It isn't poetic. It isn't dramatic. It's a truth so sincere it shakes the air itself. But grief does not pause the world. There are legal matters, government matters, war matters, and the empire, cruelly indifferent to her heart, demands her attention. Within days, she must convene the council. She enters the chamber pale, dressed in heavy mourning black, her posture slightly bent beneath the invisible weight crushing her. When she takes the throne, there's a moment, just one, where the ministers bow deeper than usual. Not out of protocol, out of compassion, she announces that Joseph will assume the role of Holy Roman Emperor. Her voice wavers. Joseph glances at her nervously. He is young, uncertain, ambitious, and not ready for this. She knows it. He knows it. The ministers know it. But this is the path now. And she will guide him, or break trying. Even in grief, she does not surrender governance. She becomes stricter, more disciplined, more decisive. It's as though she builds a wall of duty around her sorrows so powerful that nothing can breach it, not despair, not loneliness, not even Frederick's relentless campaign. Historians argue whether this period hardened her or hollowed her. Some claim she became colder, more pious, more rigid in policy. Others insist she emerged stronger, more focused, more relentless. Standing beside her now, seeing the fire flicker beneath her grief-strained face, you understand. The loss didn't harden her. It transformed her. The soft, warm parts of her heart she once shared with Francis, she now channels into the empire. Duty becomes refuge, work becomes solace, and grief becomes fuel. Francis's death did not break her. It reforged her. One night, weeks later, she walks alone into the chapel, small, dim, lit with only a handful of candles. She kneels before the altar, the stone cold beneath her palms. And she whispers into the emptiness, "Give me strength to finish what he believed I could do. Not to win, not to avenge, just to endure." A prayer whispered through tears, echoing through the quiet of a queen's shattered heart. The palace changes after Francis's death, not instantly. Not with any dramatic crack in the walls or shattering of order. But subtly, like the slow shift of seasons you only notice when the air feels different on your skin. You sense it as you walk beside Maria Theresa through corridors that once echoed with her husband's laughter. The halls feel wider now. Quieter, colder. But the silence doesn't last long. Because now comes another challenge, not an enemy from outside, but the complexity of power within her own home. This is the moment when she must rise from grief and learn how to rule with her son. Joseph, a young man with vision, with brilliance, with impatience, and with a fire that sometimes burns too hot for the world he's inherited. This is the moment their relationship transforms, grows, strains, and defines an era. When Maria Theresa enters the council chamber for the first meeting with Joseph as Holy Roman Emperor, she is wrapped in mourning black, but her posture is upright, steady, resolute. Joseph sits beside her, tall, sharp-featured, intelligent eyes flickering with restless energy. He is grieving too, but differently. Where her grief folds inward into prayer, discipline, and duty, his erupts outward into ambition, urgency, and reform. He wants change. He wants speed. He wants the future to arrive now. You watch them sit side by side, mother and son, sovereign and co-ruler, grief and fire burning in the same shared space. The ministers begin their reports. Joseph listens with hands clasped tightly. Leaning forward, at one point he interrupts, a sharp, decisive interjection, proposing a new policy to speed military logistics. The generals blink, startled. Maria Theresa's head turns slightly. Not sharply, but pointedly. He falls quiet. There it is, the tension you've been sensing. Joseph wants to lead, but she cannot let go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because the empire is fragile. The war is ongoing. And Joseph, brilliant though he is, has not yet been tempered by failure. As the meeting continues, you see the friction accumulate in small, almost invisible sparks. When a minister praises Maria Theresa's reforms, Joseph shifts, uncomfortable. When Joseph offers an innovative idea, she asks him to consider tradition. When tradition is praised, he bristles. When boldness is praised, she worries. Two minds, two visions, one empire. And yet, beneath all of it, you sense love. Deep, complicated, knotted love. Later, in her private study, Maria Theresa sits with a stack of letters, her fingers tracing the edges absent-mindedly. Joseph enters quietly, but not timidly. He closes the door, stands with arms folded. "Mother," he begins, "the empire needs different ideas now. Faster decisions, radical solutions." She looks up at him with tired, compassionate eyes. And she smiles, not dismissively, but sadly. "You remind me of your father," she says softly, but he balanced his boldness with patience. Joseph bristles. Patience is how we lost Silesia in the first place. Her expression hardens, but only for a moment. She knows what he means. She feels the wound of Silesia too. It never healed. But she also knows what he doesn't. That impatience can break what boldness hopes to build. "Joseph," she says gently, "you have fire, But fire must be guided, or it burns the one who carries it. He turns away, jaw tightening. You feel the room tighten with him. Here's a lesser-known truth. Joseph adored his mother, admired her strength, respected her deeply. But he also lived in her shadow, an enormous, towering presence that left little room for him to grow. And he struggled with that, even as he tried to hide it. Maria Theresa sees the turmoil in him, and it pains her. But she cannot step aside. Not now. So she softens her tone. "I need you," she says quietly. "You and I must work together. Not as rivals, as partners." He exhales slowly, the fight draining out of him for now. And you see the flicker of understanding between them, fragile, imperfect, hopeful. In the weeks that follow, you notice a new rhythm emerging. Joseph attends council meetings with vigor, bringing ideas that shock the traditional ministers. Some of these proposals are brilliant, clever solutions, efficient reforms, modern insights. Others are reckless, so idealistic they ignore the messy complexity of a massive, diverse empire. Maria Theresa listens carefully to each one, filtering wheat from chaff. Yes, to reorganizing the military command structure. Yes, to expanding education for common citizens. No, to sweeping religious reforms that would provoke half the empire. No, to stripping noble privileges overnight. Sometimes Joseph accepts her decisions gracefully. Sometimes he storms out in frustration. And once, in a moment of exasperation, he tells her, "You hold the reins too tightly." To which she answers, without anger, "I hold them because the carriage cannot afford to crash." You can't help but admire the way she says it, firm, calm, protective. She isn't clinging to power out of ego. She is clinging to stability. The empire needs her. Joseph needs her. And she needs him too, though she rarely admits it aloud. When not in council, she observes Joseph quietly. The way he speaks to officers. The way he studies maps late into the night. The way he writes letters filled with ideas, some brilliant, some naive. The way he moves with the impatience of someone who sees what could be instead of what is. And occasionally, the way he watches her. With concern. With admiration. With frustration. With love. The dynamic between them becomes one of the great political balancing acts of their age. Historians still argue endlessly. Was she too controlling? Was he too impulsive? Should she have given him more power earlier? Should he have been more patient? But here, living it with them, you understand something deeper. Their conflict wasn't born of ego. It was born of responsibility. He wants to change the future. She is trying to protect the present. Both are right. And both are wrong. And both are doing their best. One evening, you find Maria Theresa sitting in the chapel again, small candles flickering around her. She whispers a prayer, not with desperation this time, but with weary sincerity. "Guide him, guide me, help us not to fail each other." It isn't a political prayer. It's a mother's prayer. A ruler's prayer. A woman trying to hold her empire and her family together at once. Outside, Joseph stands in the doorway. Unseen by her, he watches her pray, his expression softening, not with pity, but with love. He murmurs, barely audible, "I'll make you proud." somehow. Then he turns away before she notices. The seasons turn, and you feel it, not just in the rustle of leaves or the shifting light through palace windows, but in the queen herself. Maria Theresa walks a little slower now. She pauses on staircases she once climbed 2 steps at a time. Her hands linger on railings, not just for balance, but as if the cool wood and stone help her steady the tide of years pressing quietly upon her. Her hair has silvered into soft threads. Her breath grows short on long walks. But her gaze, sharp, luminous, steady, has not dimmed. If anything, it burns brighter now, fueled by memory, duty, and the fierce, stubborn will that has carried her through war and loss and rebuilding. You walk beside her down a long gallery lined with portraits, ancestors, allies, children, dynasties intertwined over centuries. She pauses before her father's portrait, then Francis's. Her hand lingers on the frame of her late husband's image, her face tightening with that familiar mixture of grief and gratitude. She whispers something under her breath, a habit she has never broken, and you feel the ache of it like a small fracture in the air. Because this section is not about war, not about diplomacy, not about motherhood or rivalry or empire. This is about reflection, about an empress looking back at her life with equal parts pride and sorrow, about the narrowing horizon ahead of her. And the world, sensing the shift, begins reorganizing itself around her changing presence. Joseph takes on more responsibilities now, some eagerly, some impatiently, some clumsily. His reforms grow bolder, his ideas grow sharper, his frustration grows louder. He wants to modernize everything at once: the church, the law, the nobility, even daily life. His ambition is a wildfire trying to burn through old forests. Maria Theresa watches him with mixed emotion. Pride, yes. Fear, yes. And something like resignation too. One morning, they sit together reviewing a proposal Joseph has written, radical changes to religious practices across the empire. He speaks quickly, passionately, explaining how the reforms would free citizens from outdated laws and superstitions. Maria Theresa listens without interrupting. When he finishes, she closes the document gently. "Joseph," she says softly, "faith is not a chain you can break. It is a thread woven through our people. Pull too hard, and you unravel more than you repair." He clenches his jaw. "You always think I'll go too far. And you always think I won't go far enough," she answers. There it is again, the soft clash of fire and granite. But neither storms, neither shouts. They have grown into a more delicate balance now. A partnership made of friction, yes, but also of love worn smooth by years of trying to understand each other. You follow her through the city on an inspection tour, something she insists on doing even now. Even when ministers beg her to rest. She visits schools she established years ago. Children bow and recite lessons. She smiles proudly, knowing education may be her most enduring reform. She visits hospitals, where the improvements she mandated have saved countless lives. She walks the markets, speaks to merchants, nods respectfully to the elderly. And everywhere she goes, people whisper, "The Empress, our mother. May God bless her." The affection is real, tangible, earned, Few monarchs inspire such deep loyalty in both nobles and commoners. But Maria Theresa ruled with a careful blend of firmness and humanity. And her people feel that still. Yet not everything she sees brings comfort. Some roads remain in poor condition. Some regions still strain under war debts. Some reforms Joseph pushes have caused unrest. Some old wounds, like Silesia, still ache painfully. Even decades later, she absorbs it all with a quiet heaviness. Not every mend is perfect, she murmurs to herself, but I have tried to stitch what I could. Back in the palace, she receives letters from her daughters across Europe. Spain, Naples, Parma, Tuscany, France. Some letters are full of warmth. Some carry anxiety. Some hide struggles beneath polite phrasing. And one, from Maria Antonia, now Marie Antoinette, radiates youthful optimism, oblivious to the storm that will one day engulf her. Maria Theresa smiles at her daughter's words, so bright, so naive, so unaware of the sharp teeth behind the silks of Versailles. She writes back gently, offering motherly advice disguised as political caution. Be gracious, she writes. Be patient. Remember your roots. Do not let flattery cloud your judgment. She cannot protect her children from distance. So she sends wisdom instead. Wisdom wrapped in love. A lesser-known truth. When one of her daughters suffered a stillbirth, Maria Theresa wept for days. When another wrote of loneliness, she sent a letter filled with such tenderness it nearly reads like poetry. She never stopped being a mother, no matter how vast the empire became. As evening deepens, you find her in the private apartments where she once laughed with Francis, rocked newborns, studied treaties, and mourned alone. The fire crackles softly. Her hands rest on a stack of documents she no longer has the strength to read. Joseph enters quietly. He hesitates, then sits beside her. For a long moment, neither speaks. Finally he says, "You built all of this. I am only trying to honor it." She looks at him, eyes warm despite the exhaustion. "I know," she whispers, "but honor must be carried with care." He swallows, hard, because he understands what she isn't saying. She won't be here forever. He will have to stand alone soon. The realization flickers across his face like a shadow passing over sunlight. Then she reaches for his hand and squeezes. "You will lead," she says, her voice trembling at the edges. "You will do what you believe is right. And I will be proud of you, always." He lowers his head. "I still need you. You need your own strength." She replies gently, "Not mine." It is the softest lesson she has ever taught him. Night falls over Vienna. A cold wind trembles through the shutters. Maria Theresa gazes out her window at the city she spent decades holding together. The wars she survived, the children she raised, the reforms she carved into its bones, the scars she healed, the scars she caused, the mistakes she carries, the victories she earned. Historians still argue. Was she enlightened or authoritarian? Progressive or conservative? Motherly or controlling? A symbol of stability or of stubbornness? But standing here beside her, watching her eyes soften with memory and sharpen with regret, you see the truth she never speaks aloud. She was human. Trying, always trying, to shape a world that constantly shifted beneath her feet. Tomorrow will pull her closer to the final chapter. Time is catching up. Her breath is shorter. Her nights are longer. Her prayers deeper. The palace feels softer now, as though time itself has laid a gentle hand across its walls. The edges of things blur a little, the glow of lanterns. The hush of servant steps. The crisp lines of the courtyard trees swaying in the cold air. You walk beside Maria Theresa, and you feel her moving differently. As if each step is both an effort and a farewell. Not dramatic, not mournful, simply inevitable. Because this is the last stretch of a long, unbroken journey. The quiet descent after a lifetime of climbing. Her body has grown frail. Her breaths come slower, occasionally catching like a snagged thread. But her eyes still carry that unyielding spark, the one that saw her through battles, reforms, births, deaths, alliances, betrayals, and the impossible task of holding a continent together. She steps into her study, the room that has shaped so much of her world. The desk is lined with papers, some she signed decades ago, some only yesterday. Ministers arrive with updates, hovering with concern, hesitating before speaking, as though afraid their words might weigh too heavily on her. But she waves them forward. She still listens, still questions, still decides. Even now. A report from Bohemia. A petition from peasants in Moravia. A letter from Joseph detailing his latest reform proposal. And a note from Marie Antoinette, naive and bright, describing a masquerade at Versailles. Maria Theresa smiles faintly at that one. A tender, tired smile that carries both love and foreknowledge of storms her daughter cannot yet imagine. You watch her fold the letter carefully, as though protecting it from the air. The council meeting today is shorter than usual. She sits at the head of the table. Joseph on her right. Ministers speak with deep respect. Not just because she is queen, but because she is near the end. And they know it. When Joseph outlines a proposed tax reform, she listens, nods, and says quietly, "Good. But remember the poor. Always remember them." He swallows. "I will." Their eyes meet. Mother and son. Teacher and pupil. Two rulers sharing one crown. The room feels suspended, the air thick with unspoken recognition. She is passing the torch, piece by piece, even as she continues to hold it. Afterward, Joseph walks with her down the corridor. He slows his steps to match hers, something he rarely did before. She notices. She says nothing. He says nothing, but the silence is full. This, finally, is not a clash of wills. It is alignment. Soft, hard-earned, true. That evening, she visits the chapel again. Candles glow low and warm, casting halos across worn stone. She kneels slowly, her joints stiff, her breath trembling. Her prayers today are quieter, shorter, but deeper, as though she is speaking to someone seated right beside her. Listening with perfect patience. "Give them guidance," she whispers. "Give me peace." When she rises, she steadies herself against a wooden pew. She holds it a moment longer than usual. Back in her chambers, the night settles gently over her. A fire crackles. Snow falls softly outside. Her daughters visit in twos and threes, offering kisses, stories, reassurances. Maria Anna reads to her. Maria Christine fusses over her pillows. Maria Antonia's latest letter lies open nearby, its handwriting full of youthful loops and swirls. Joseph visits last. He sits beside her bed. His face softer than you've ever seen it, no frustration, no ambition, no rivalry, just a son. He takes her hand. She strokes his knuckles with her thumb, the way she did when he was a boy and feared thunderstorms. "You are ready," she murmurs. "I'm not," he whispers back. She smiles faintly. "Neither was I." There is no grandeur in this moment. No trumpets. No ceremony. Just the quiet transfer of a lifetime's weight from a fading hand to a steady one. Historians debate her final days endlessly. Her last decisions, her last letters, her last words. But they rarely describe this. The deep, fragile tenderness between her and the son she shaped and struggled with. As the night deepens, she drifts into sleep, breath slowing, thoughts loosening. You stay beside her, feeling the world narrow around her like a soft cocoon. Outside, Vienna sleeps under a thin layer of snow, unaware that its greatest protector is slipping gently toward the end. Her life has been a tapestry of victories and mistakes, reforms and resistance, children and crowns, grief and grit, tenderness and iron. She has never been perfect. But she has always been present. Fully, fiercely, unapologetically. When dawn comes, it is gentle and pale. Maria Theresa does not rise with it. The empire mourns, bells toll, churches fill, ministers bow their heads not from ritual but from genuine grief. And Joseph, now truly emperor, stands in the doorway of her chamber. Eyes red, jaw tight, shoulders squared beneath the future she left him. And just like that, her story becomes memory, legacy, history. But not silence. Never silence. Because an empress who shaped continents leaves echoes that centuries cannot erase. End of script. Sweet dreams.